Greetings, nerds and fellow Trekkers. This is Will Polk, host of Cena Nerd Presents Blur Trek, and co-host and producer of the Cena Nerd podcast with our host, Sarah Belmont. Thank you so much for joining me today, as I'm going to be talking about episode 26 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Lost in Translation. This episode was written by Anitra Johnson and David Reed, and directed by Dan Liu. This review content is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and is not a promotion nor promotional materials for any other parties. We stand in full solidarity with SAG-AFTRA and the WGA. This is a spoiler review, so if you haven't watched the episode, stop now, go watch it, and then come back here and see the rest of this video as I give my thoughts on Lost in Translation. So just to set things up with this episode, the Enterprise, Farragut, and several other ships are in the Bannon Nebula to conduct maintenance and upgrades to a deuterium mining station built by Starfleet that is going to be used to not only help continue exploration on the edge of space, but also, given the growing Gorn threat, give Starfleet a tactical advantage in this sector. So we have that as sort of a backstory to sort of set things up. We found Uhura completely overstressed and overworked, some of her own making. And, you know, as the youngest member of the bridge crew, she's only 22. And so she's thinking about the past. She's watching videos of her with engineer Hemmer, who was the prior chief engineer of the Enterprise. And she's thinking about that, thinking about loss and some of the guiding figures in her life, her family as well. So during that moment, she starts to hear some sounds and stuff, and of course she goes to sick bay, and Dr. Mbenga and everyone really tries to figure out what's going on with her. So all that is going on and trying to figure out what's going on with Uhura. Newly promoted First Officer of the USS Farragut, Lieutenant James T. Kirk, comes over to the Enterprise and is meeting the rest of the team, the crew. You know, of course, he has a reunion with his brother Sam, and this is really the first time we've actually seen in our home universe James T. Kirk in Star Trek Strange New Worlds. We've had alternate versions of him. So we have that in this episode, and together with all the things that are going on with Uhura, the rest of the crew, one of the members of the mining station, they all are trying to figure out what's going on and to help her, but also determine if there has been a potential sabotage on the deuterium mining station. And so the episode is really an exploration of that. So most of the overall thoughts of the episode is that this is in some ways a break from the big swings that we've seen over the last few parts of this season. Of course, it is still, in a sense, that it's more of a classical Trek type episode, where we do have some horror as far as some of the background, but there's also mystery, there's the sci-fi suspense, some scares, of course, like we see with the initial scene there, a zombie Hemmer, and also some inspiration, of course, the usual dashes of humor that we've come to get used to in this show and in Star Trek, and just a little bit of romance, which we'll touch on here in a little bit. But this episode has great emotion, and something that is often glossed over in Star Trek, in particular in the original series, is when you have the loss of a crew member, and how how it impacts other crew members for the long term. And in many situations when things happen, it just sort of gets glossed over and we move on to the next week. But here we really get an exploration, particularly with Uhura, as far as Hemmer's death on her, and also her family as well. But great to see Bruce Horak, speaking of Hemmer, back this week. While this was an episode that was dealing with grief, and we did and scares, like as I mentioned before, we had the Hemmer zombie moment. It was nice to see him back. I really enjoyed Hemmer and Bruce Horak's portrayal of him in the first season. So even though this is an episode dealing with grief and learning how to accept grief and how to move on from it, or not necessarily move on, but move forward from grief, this hopefully we'll be able to see him back in some future episodes if the story requires it. I don't want him just to come back for coming back's sake, but if there's a dramatic or story element reason for his return, then I think I'm hopeful that they could bring him or back in that to capacity. And then my last overall thoughts with this episode is that you had multiple stories. You had at least five stories that I think you could probably count on, and it's very smart writing with this show and pulling together uh, all those stories together in a very tight, coherent episode where everybody I felt got, while it was clearly Uhura's episode, it also was nice moments for everybody else. Of course, we get the dynamics tightly dealt with, with Uhura's pain and her growth as far as dealing with loss and trying to come to grips with loss. We get the Kirk brothers dynamics with sibling rivalries and everything else. We get Una and Pelia and their dynamic going on between the command style of Una versus Pelia's general laissez-faire attitude towards things. And then, of course, we have the romance with Spock and Chapel, trying to figure out what's going on with them. And then Pike as the maestro of the starship, the newly promoted fleet captain for this temporary assignment, Captain Pike, trying to keep everything going in the correct direction and trying to help a member and save a member of his crew who clearly is going through something. So uh, again, a great episode of deep character dives, in particular with Uhura, Lieutenant James Kirk, but also smaller ones with Una, Pelia, Spock, Chapel, and even Lon briefly with her meeting Lieutenant Kirk on the Enterprise. So those are my overall thoughts in this episode. Really, really, really did enjoy it. And now, before we get into some deeper dive points of the episode, just quick call to action is if you like what you've heard so far, please hit that like button, and also please all throughout drop comments. I love hearing back from folks and I will definitely answer all your comments when you send them to me. So hit that, please hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode of CNN Presents Blur Trek or our main show on this channel. Turning to this episode now, as far as deeper dive in some of the beats, this episode really deals with family, it deals with loss and people's approach to loss. And of course, we have this with Uhura as far as her coming to grips and trying to make sense of losing Hemmer, who was a very important person in her early young career in Starfleet. Of course, she was still a cadet when she was assigned to work with him, and in the first season. Now she's an ensign, bridge officer, and the youngest bridge officer. We learned she's 22, and so her dealing with Hemmer's loss, but also still not being able to fully move forward from the loss of her parents and her brother, which we explored that aspect of in the first season, and how driven she's been and how she became, she accidentally fell into Starfleet because, if you recall, she was questioning why is she even in Starfleet and why should she even be here in the first season, and but she decided to stick it out and move forward. But really, in doing so, we see how people sometimes, and in a horror's case, sometimes don't healthily deal with loss and grief and stuff. I mean, there's healthy ways to deal with things and there's unhealthy ways. And it seems that Uhura really dealt with it in a very unhealthy way as far as just throwing herself into things to her work. It seems she's always been a high achieving, high knowledgeable person, but it seemed that she took that to the extreme, to the place where she was physically, emotionally just exhausted and just wrung out. And so, to the point that where when she did finally start to hear those sounds and stuff, it was it. Mbinga originally thought it was due to exhaustion and not thinking that it could be some other thing, and but or maybe and also thought it may also have been possibly due to her exposure to deuterium, because she was doing some work in the warp nacelle when they were collecting the uh, gases from the nebula to recharge the ship, and she was doing some tweaks and maintenance on things that I'm watching a video with Hammer, which of course you have all those things hitting all at once, and she's just wrung out. And so so you had that going on. But what I really really liked about this episode was introducing Jim Kirk to the team, and now in the Prime universe, because we've seen him in alternate places, but this was the first time we've really seen him interact with the crew of the Enterprise in the Prime Star Trek universe that we know. We he helps between her and other members of the crew, really help her come, not necessarily to forget what happened and all, but really learn to how to healthily deal with the grief and the loss of her family and him, and how you can move forward in doing so, to the point to where at the end, even though Captain Pike knew that she was emotionally distressed and just tired, but after they discovered that what was going on in the nebula was actually there were life forms in there, and they were actually harming them by using this harvester on the mining station there. He between even though she was clearly worn out, he trusted her and trusted her judgment that this was harming her, and followed her recommendation and destroyed the station so that they could not harm the life forms in there. And also, again, just really showing how this crew really trust one another, how with Kirk being introduced this way, and showing how he, those early stages of being a commanding officer, caring for the well-being of his crew, was someone he didn't really know that well, quite frankly. He just met, even mistake to the point where they had to kind of jokingly play off of whether or not he was hitting her on her or not, because of the reputation that Kirk has had in over time, both in universe and even out of universe. So it was it was really cool to see that, and really good growth for Uhura, and seeing how she is starting to move forward in her life, from all the losses that she's had. And so I really enjoyed that. Turning to Jim Kirk and Sam Kirk, this was, like I said, first time we got to see Jim in the Prime universe. We do see the exploration of Jim and Sam's relationship, the daddy issues that they both clearly have. Of course, Sam wanting to, jealous of Jim's career, because Jim is just got promoted to the first officer in the of the Farragut, and he is on the track, just like their father was, to be the youngest first officer ever in the fleet. If I think Jim was on track to actually beat his father's record. And also a nice little note there too, that their father still is alive in this universe. Because if you've watched Star Trek 2009, there was a divergence in the timeline due to the events, with outside interference of Nero coming back. Spoiler alert. That caused things to split, and that's why you have the Kelvin universe now, and you have our Prime universe. And in that, so there was that. But seeing that sibling rivalry, but also even with the sibling rivalry, how the two of them were still able to work together to help Uhura figure out what was going on with her illness, and also the motivations between the two brothers and stuff. And also, given that it was really the first time we've had that interaction to them, and knowing, spoiler alert, if you don't know, Sam is later killed when Jim is in commander of the Enterprise on Deneva. And so, really the only time we've seen Sam Kirk before that was when William Shatner was playing double of a dead Sam Kirk on the floor, and Jim seeing him. So, so we do get that dynamic going on there. Of course, we get the interaction between Lon and Jim as well, and even though he definitely made a point to say, "Hey, I still want that drink," but also to, quickly turning to Lon, her conflicts there as far as trying to figure out, like, oh God, he's actually here now. What do I do? So that's it was kind of a, it was a nice little moment there as far as romance and stuff. So, but I really like what they're doing with this version of Kirk, and bringing him in when the story needs it, because of course it is James T. Kirk, so that shadow looms heavily over everything in Star Trek. But we're seeing him again as Lieutenant Kirk, and we're seeing him on the path of his. We see the ambition, and we see the brashness and all the things that we have when we see an older version of the character. We understand. The one we know, we're seeing those early stages of that development here, and I really really liked that, and so it was really fun to see that dynamic play out. Turning to Una and Pelia, their approach to work, and Una is not like him. Pelia's laissez-faire approach to to following orders, and there was, of course, we get deeper into really finding out what that was really about. It was partly Una's feelings about losing Himmer, but also it goes back to whenever Una was taking Pelia's class at the academy, and she got a C in the class. And then now, she had someone who gave her a C, and now just kind of just like brushes off orders and stuff. It was really like picking at a nerve there that Una had. So great moment there. Spock and Chapel dealing with how to treat their relationship. Again, is it a friends with benefits situation, or is it something different? And so having seen them while they're playing chess, and Spock being very Spock, like, wanted to we report this to Starfleet as far as as far as fraternization and those kind of things, and just their early stages as far as trying to figure out what this actually is, and folks, obviously, relationships early on, you are trying to figure out what are we, and all, and and all. So it was really fun to see that. And then of course the final point of the episode, where we do have Kirk, Spock meeting for the first time, and again bonding over not Jim's brother Sam, and Sam's messiness, which of course was on display multiple times here, and both of them commiserating over that. And the line, he is so frustrating, and seeing that handshake, and seeing that first moment of Kirk and Spock, and then of course Uhura sitting there in the mess hall, having getting to know one another, and seeing that the spark of that relationship, and how it even sparked over Sam Kirk's messiness. uh really was just an amazing moment. Yeah, for yes, it was your fan service, but it was also a love letter to the fans too, because it's just, we've always wondered, how did these guys first meet? And I'm sure many of us have various headcanons as far as how Kirk and Spock first met. There was a book, I believe it was called The First Federation. One of the books explored it, their first meeting. Um, but but to see it in universe and in canon here, as far as their first meeting, was very very rewarding as a fan for me. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, and like to hear your thoughts on some of the things I've shared here, and things that what you took from the episode, as far as all the relationships, and all the things we learned about our characters in this episode. Turning now to some Easter eggs in Lost in Translation. Several things I wanted to just note. First, we did have the Bannon Nebula, where the episode took place, as a nice memorial to Melissa Navia's partner. He had sadly passed away while they were filming the series, and so this was a tribute to him. The big one, of course, is how are they going to reconcile the menagerie line, where Kirk says to Spock and McCoy, as they're going to see Captain Pike when they were on the starbase, I only met him once when he was promoted to fleet captain. We got that answer today. I love the way they used the temporary field promotion to fleet captain to deal with this task force, to deal with the deuterium mining, as a way of in universe reconciling that line from the original series. Thought that was masterful stroke. Hats off to the writers for doing that. And I'm very, very satisfied with that way they handled that. Love to hear how your thoughts on that, if you were as well. We get to see the Jeffries tubes, the access tube that led up to the warp nacelle where Uhura was doing her work on the ship. We also learn in canon, we've seen the Bussard collectors being used before for other purposes throughout Star Trek, but we actually got in this episode the primary purpose for the Bussard collectors on the warp nacelles, what they were actually intended for. So we got to see that in this episode. A couple other fun things. Uhura like Saurian brandy, which that's a drink of choice of many of folks in the Star Trek. I touched on it earlier before, but the Kirk and Uhura getting hit on by Kirk in Star Trek 2009. It was clear when they were in the bar in Iowa that he was trying to hit on her, but here it was a little more ambiguous. But we did have a nice callback to that. Another Easter egg from Lost in Translation is with Uhura and the green hoop earrings. We also saw a similar type of hoop earring in the Deadly Years in the original series. We just a little small detail. Uhura now being promoted to an officer, full ensign. She has her own personal quarters. One of the perks of being an officer instead of a cadet that we got to see was Uhura wearing a do-rag, which I think is the first time that we've actually seen someone wear a do-rag in Star Trek. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, Pelia giving Una a C and Starfleet maintenance, and then a very meta reference to the original series when Una called Pelia a space hippie. So if you saw other Easter eggs, let me know what else you spotted during the episode. One other, I won't say Easter egg, but just a funny moment and nice just production moment was the callback whenever Kirk and Spock met with Sam and the messiness. You know, that I laughed out loud. I was on the floor because and the looks and everything. Granted, the bigger moment was there too, but that little detail was just a chef's kiss as far as a production direction moment. But thank you for joining me as I close out this latest episode of Scene Nerd Presents Blur Trek. Follow our crew on Twitter at Scene Nerd and at Scene Nerd SNN Blur Trek. Friend us on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram and Threads at scene_n_nerd and at our website at www.scenenerdpodcast.com. Our main show drops every Friday. Be sure to rate, follow, and comment on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Subscribe to us here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Live long and prosper.